Good evening, everyone. We are going to continue in our Kashrut lectures. We're now going to look at uncovered liquids and try and understand why this one is prohibited. It's what's known as mashkim megulim. And it's brought in Masechet Chulin on Daf Yud. And the issue here is that we're worried that snakes may inject poison into these uncovered liquids, making them prohibited. And the Mishnah says as follows, and it's a Mishnah in Terumot. Tanan Hatam, it's taught over there. Shlosha mashkin asurin mishum galui. There are three liquids which are forbidden if they are uncovered. Mayim, water, yain, wine, vechalav, and milk. Kama yeshu v'yu asurin. How long, if they are uncovered, will they be prohibited till they become prohibited? Says the Mishnah, kedei sheyatza harechesh b'makom karov v'yishteh. The time it takes for a snake which is nearby to come in and drink. Says the Mishnah, v'kama makom karov. How close is this? Amar Rav Yitzchak b'rei de Rabbi Yehuda. The time it takes for it to emerge from under the handle and drink. Says the Gemara, how can that be? If the snake is drinking it, you can see the snake. Ela, the Gemara answers, the time it takes for the snake to come out, drink, and go back to its hole without being seen. And the Bet Yosef quotes a number of Rishonim explaining exactly how much that is. Let's have a look here that we're going to see the commentary of the Tosafot. And the Baalei Tosafot, living in France and Germany, are saying that this rabbinic rule is no longer a concern for us, much like melach sodomite, sodomite salt. I don't need to be careful about doing my macharonim because I'm not worried about it getting into my eyes because we don't have that type of salt around. So here, Tosafot wants to say, since we don't really have snakes where we live in Northern Europe, we don't need to be worried about this rabbinic gezerah. Says Tosafot as follows: V'ano she'en nechashim metzuyin benenu. We don't have any snakes around us. Ein lachush mishum galui. We're not worried about uncovered water or wine or milk. Ve'ein lomar dedavar shebeminyan hu v'tzarich minyan acher lehatiro. Don't say because this was enacted by a vote of great rabbis that we need such a vote to permit it. Don't say that. Why? Ki bevadai hush keshe'asru techila lo asru ela b'makom she'nechashim metzuyin. The only time that they forbid the rabbis in the Mishnah was where snakes are found. And since they would never make a gezerah on a place which the snakes are not found. And the Shulchan Aruch rules like Tosafot. And says as follows: Mashkim shenitgalu, uncovered liquids, asrum hachamim, the rabbis forbade them, the chayshinan shema shatan nachash mehem, vitul be'eres. Why did the rabbis forbid these uncovered liquids? Because they were concerned lest a snake drink from them and then afterwards inject their poison into the water. But Maran, again, quoting Tosafot, says, "V'achshav she'en nechashim metzuyim benenu mutar." But now, since we don't have many snakes around us, then we can permit them. We don't need to worry about this rabbinic gezerah. The Gra, the Vilna Gaon, quotes the explanation of Tosafot as how to such a rabbinic decree could be ignored. And note that there are other cases as well where the decree does not apply because there was no concern in such cases. as he says here, quotes the Tosfot in Avodah Zarah and Perek Kama de Yom Tov, Uperek Batra de Yoma, and the last Perek in Masechet Yoma, Ushar Makamot, and in other places. And he writes, En kan mishum davar shebeminyan, shelo nigzera lechatchila, ela b'makom de yesh mishum galui. What's going on here? There is no problem of a decree through a vote, what's known as a davar shebeminyan, that you need, in order to annul it, you would need another Beit Din of similar number to come and remove that gezerah, which we don't have. Why? Since the original decree was only made in a place that there was a concern of exposed liquids. For example, that they had snakes. And we say the same thing with yain mevushal, with cooked wine, that we have no concern of it being uncovered. And there are lots of examples like this. And similarly for us, bekulam, with all of these, kevan shelo ne'aseh legamrei, all of these cases, they were never, when the rabbinic decree came out in the first place, it was never a whole wraparound saying that all things were forbidden. It was only in certain circumstances. So here, the original gezerah was only for places which had snakes. And since therefore most of us don't live in a place where snakes are coming around, we don't need to be worried about uncovered water, uncovered milk, or uncovered wine. We have a dissenting position, though, in the Pitkei Teshuvah. And the Pitkei Teshuvah says, Ayin b'shnei luchot habrit, have a look at the Shla, who writes, Demikol makom, shomer nafsho, yuchak mizeh, someone who wants to guard their soul, someone who wants to be careful, they should distance themselves from this. Why? V'ha raya, because there's a proof, Sharei HaTur, because the Torah himself wrote, Lekol hadanim echad mehem lo notar, all the halachot which the Hachamim made in the time of the Mishnah, one should not leave out any of them. Uvahanhagat hachasid hagra katuv gamken sheyihayad nizhar me'od b'davar zeh ayin sham ta'amo. And even the customs of the Gra who we just said permitted it, he said one should be very careful, even with these things which he said one didn't need to be careful about. Al-Ken, therefore one who wishes to be careful should have a look at all the rules of the Torah and not be lenient. And as I mentioned there, if you look at footnote 19, it's interesting to note that apparently the Gra himself, he was personally stringent, despite the fact in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch, he said that one could be lenient. And that's, to me, that's no contradiction. I could be personally strict about something and still tell my congregants that they can be lenient. So, you know, it's not a contradiction from me what the Gra is saying. He may personally have said, I want to be careful with it, even if he was okay with everyone following a more lenient position. But the question is, let's say that I suddenly find myself living in a place where there are snakes. And this is exactly what comes up here. There are places in northern and southern Israel, not in major cities, but there are places where there may be concern because there's snakes. With the halacha of mashkim megulim, with these uncovered liquids, would I have to make a ruling on this? This question was brought to Rav Yitzchak Yaakov Weiss in his Minchat Yitzchak, and he appears to conclude that one should be stringent where snakes are found. And you see that in footnote 21. It mentions, just so you know, that Rav Weiss, he lived in England, where he wrote his Teshuvah, and he visited Israel at some point. Later, he made Aliyah to Israel permanently. And it should be noted that even today, there are often reports in the news of people getting bitten by poisonous snakes. And so therefore, the fact that he's writing this, that one should be careful, he wasn't writing out of a lack of knowledge. He knew that there are places where there are snakes, and therefore he says it would be good in Israel, especially if you're living in a more rural area, to be careful about this. The Sefer Kashrut seems to confirm that in communities where snakes are sometimes seen, one should be strict, but clarifies based on Rab Ben Zion Abba Shaul that only certain parts of the community will be subject to the prohibition. And he says as follows: the shlosha mashkim, these three liquids we've been talking about, mayim, yain, and chalav, water, wine, and milk, that remained uncovered, bein bayom or bein balayla, whether it was during the day or whether it was at night, in a place where snakes and scorpions are found, they are forbidden to drink, unless there was a person who was awake and presumably watching over them. And therefore, the time that they were uncovered to render it prohibited would be very short. And he writes here, this refers to one-story houses or apartments that are on the first floor where there are fields or open lots around it, such as houses located in the outskirts of the community. That's the limiting factor of Rab Ben Zion Abba Shaul. But if you live on a high-rise or whatever, there wouldn't be this concern. Nevertheless, Rav Eliezer Melamed, one of the contemporary rabbis today in his Pinyanei Halacha, seems to accept that even in Israel, the halacha of not drinking uncovered liquids does not apply because snakes are not found in the same frequency. Like, just because you can say there was once someone who found a snake or someone saw a snake doesn't mean that snakes are common. And since it's not something which is common, therefore we don't need to rule stringently about this. You can see that there. And then the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer of Waldenberg, was asked that whether one who is strict about the issues nowadays, if he can be lenient if the liquid is placed in the refrigerator or in other closed areas. So let's say it's uncovered, but it's in the refrigerator. Is that okay? And he says yes. And you can write at the bottom there, he says, in my opinion, the main reason for the permissive ruling of the Chazon Ish in the case of the refrigerator is because it's not possible for a snake to enter. And accordingly, it would also be permitted, according to him, in a closed closet where it's impossible for a snake to enter, since the decree of the sages was not instituted in such a case. And so therefore, not wanting to state the obvious, if the uncovered liquid is in a refrigerator, thank God, what the poskim say, you don't have to worry about it. So just to summarize what we've seen about these liquids, we have the position in the Mishnah brought down by the Gemara in Chulin that these uncovered liquids, one needs to be careful about them and not drink them because of snakes. They could have put poison in there. Tosfot comes along and says, we don't have any snakes. The rabbis were only making their ruling in places which have snakes, and therefore we don't need to be careful about this. Surprisingly, that's the halacha. Shulchan Aruch says we follow Tosfot, and most of the Achronim hold like that. But there are questions about whether snakes are found in some places. Should I be strict? It's good to be strict if you can. However, since even where places where snakes can be found, they're very rarely found. Most normally, especially if it's been covered in a refrigerator or a closet or whatever, one does not need to worry about it. Any questions about uncovered liquids? Rubisa.
This might have been covered in the beginning. I'm sorry that I joined late, but can you clarify if it's not a snake you're worried about, but the likelihood of something else entering an open liquid container, like fruit flies?
So it's not a kashrut issue. This seems to be specifically poison, or dare I say it, ruach ra'ah, which is that word we're going to see a little bit over the next other cases of a spirit of impurity coming into it. And it's a kashrut issue, and that's another thing which I think we need to be careful of, especially in Seattle in the winter, or in the fall, or in the spring, or in the summer, anytime that those lovely fruit flies like to be there. If you're leaving food out and you can see that the fruit flies are there, that all one would need to do is just check the food for if the fruit flies are there and give them a good shooing and making sure the food you're eating doesn't have fruit flies. Here it's saying, even if you shooed away or you didn't see anything, there's still that concern, perhaps the snakes were there or not. So since we don't have snakes, we don't have to be concerned. But let's say we had some sort of poisonous insect or other type thing, though, some sort of plague of some concern, then that would be an issue. Does that help to answer? Okay, let's continue. And we're now gonna look at other foods forbidden due to danger. And we're gonna talk about placing foods under a bed or a couch. So again, I not mean to scare people that we're less than 6 weeks till Pesach, but this whole thing of being on a bed, it's a question of, is this like a couch where someone would recline on, because that's the way that people used to eat, or is it talking about a bed and they're worried about people sleeping? And here we're going to get into this whole discussion about ruach ra'ah, about the evil spirit. So we're going to see here in Masechet Pesachim, Kuf Yud Bet Amud Aleph, it says, Tana, it's taught, Ochlin umashkin tachat hamita. If you got foods or drinks under a bed, afilu mechufin bekeli barzel. Even if they're covered with they're covered with iron vessels. Even they're really firmly closed. So there's no issue that something poisonous or bugs have got in there. Ruach ra'ah shura alehen. There's an issue that evil spirits have rested upon them. So the question is, what is it talking about? Evil spirits from the bed. What are they talking about? The Torat Chaim explains that, and we're going to see this is a Gemara in Masechet Berachot, in Perek HaRoeh, that says that when we sleep, sleep is 1/60th of death. And the reason why it's considered 1/60th of death is every time we sleep, our neshamot, our souls leave our bodies and go up to heaven and come back again when we wake up. Okay, that's what we say, Elokai Neshama, when we say that in the morning, we're thanking God for returning our souls to us. So therefore, when we're sleeping, our bodies are in fact emanating, when they don't have a neshama in them, they're emanating from them a ruach ra'ah, an evil spirit. It says here, Da'amar Pesachim, ochlin tachat hamita ruach ra'ah sharia alehen. That it says in the Gemara Pesachim that food under the bed, where the concern is that evil spirit is resting upon them. Why? Tam hadavar nireh lefi shehashena echad mishishim b'mita. Why? Because sleep is considered 1/60th of death. B'shat sheina, because at the time of sleeping, nishmato shel adam tohara yotzet, because the pure soul of the person leaves. And then this is why the evil spirit rests upon the person's body. And this is, I'm going to add here, one of the reasons for Netilat Yadayim. I'm adding that one. It's not the only reason for Netilat Yadayim. Another reason we do Netilat Yadayim is because maybe while we were sleeping, we touched parts of our bodies which we shouldn't, and therefore we wash our hands as well for that. וכשהוא מהיר בשעת שינה על האוכלים, הרי כאילו היו באוהל המת, ושרי עליהן ההוא רמאסבה. So basically what he's saying here is, because you've been sleeping and your body is like a tent over the food, or your bed is like a tent over the food, and therefore and you're like a corpse, then you're adding in that ruach ra'ah. The Rambam disagrees in this, and that's not surprising because we saw this last week. The Rambam is not really interested in this Kabbalistic stuff and evil spirits and all that nature. And he said the only issue is if it's uncovered. But if the food was covered, there would be no problem. And He learns that out from a Gemara in Masech in the Yerushalmi. Normally we learn from the Bavli. Here he's learning it from the Yerushalmi. And there it says, a person should not put coins in his mouth or cook food underneath the bed, bread under the armpit. And that's an interesting thing. Clearly, it wasn't just that it was disgusting that sweat or something would be in the bread, but perhaps there was something poisonous from the sweat or something there. Or one should not tuck a knife into a radish or a knife into an etrog. And according to the Rambam, what's the concern for the Yerushalmi in all these cases? That something harmful may fall into the food. And therefore, what is the bed? The bed is more a couch used for during meals. As I said, in the time of the Gemara, and this is why we do it at Pesach time, we lean, and some people sometimes they don't use regular chairs. They do the seder on couches because that was the way they were doing it. What was the concern? If I have something under the couch or under the bed or under the sofa, if it's uncovered, then food might fall into it or something else might fall into it, causing it to be a problem. But if it is covered, then the Harambam wouldn't have a problem. He says here, Lo yiten atzavshil tachat hamita, ap al pi shehu osek b'seuda, shema yipol bo davar hamazik, v'hu eno ro'ehu. One should not place a cooked dish under the couch, even though he's in the midst of his meal. Why? Perhaps something that could harm him fell into it without him noticing. According to the Rambam, then it would be permitted if it were covered. But the Shulchan Aruch doesn't rule like Harambam, and he says, Mima nafshach, either way you want to look at it. If something is placed under the bed, what's the reason why it's out? Not what the Rambam said, that something might have fallen into it, which is a logical reason. He quotes the mystical reason. It's because an evil spirit has rested over those foods. And the Shach even says, the Shulchan Aruch is talking about afilu mechusim, even if they were covered. So, what's the halacha if food or drink was placed under the bed despite the prohibition? Since the Shulchan Aruch only states that one is not allowed to do so, does that imply that if one did it anyway, b'diavad, after the fact, one would be allowed to consume it? Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank in his Har Tzvi, that this question is subject to a machloket achronim. It's an argument amongst the later deciders. And therefore, lechatchila, one should not do it. But b'diavad, but after the fact, there is no concern. Rav Ovadia Yosef is a little bit more strict. He says, lechatchila, one should not do it. And even b'diavad, even after the fact, one should not do it either, unless there's a hefsed merubeh. There is a large financial loss, as you can see here in source 49. She'im ein hefsed merubeh yesh lachmir. If there's no financial loss, one should be strict. Okay, so that's an extra stringency here, which is normally we say, lechatchila, don't do it, b'diavad you can. Here it's saying, lechatchila and b'diavad, don't do it. The only reason you can do it is if there's a financial loss. And the reason why he holds like this is because there are so many achronim who are strict, such as the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai, the Nahar Mitzrayim. Okay, big heavy hitters which we don't want to go against. Okay, big Kabbalistic heavy hitters as well. But he says, Ulam behefsed merubeh efshar leharot lahakel. But in case of financial loss, one could be lenient. One can be lenient. And he says there, but nevertheless, when there is no major loss, one should be strict unless there are other considerations to be lenient. And then he adds, and it's proper to wash foods that were underneath the bed 3 times, and see the Artzot HaChaim there, and that is clear that if one did not sleep on the bed while the food was under the bed, but remove them beforehand, then b'di'avad, one could do so, even if there's no major loss. So here we're seeing it's the sleeping, it's the ruach ra'ah, which is the issue. The Yaakov Yosef, Hacham Ovadiah's son, brings another leniency, which is if the one may not place food or drink under the bed, but b'di'avad, after the fact, food or drinks that were under the bed and one slept on it, the number of those who permit it is greater than those who forbid it. And certainly, if the floor underneath the bed was tiled, placed with beams or with wood, then one may permit it in that case too, even if there's only a small loss. Okay, in 26, and the reason is that somehow Ruach Ra'ah is only present on actual ground with earth, but on tiled floors, it's not there. So therefore, again, I'm getting rid of that mystical Ruach Ra'ah, and it has nothing to do with Harambam about uncovered. And for the Ashkenazim, Rav Shmuel Vosner was also lenient in his Shevet HaLevi in an after-fact situation. Now, what about peeled eggs and peeled onions and garlic and leaving those overnight? And what about pickled eggs and pickled onions and pickled all these things? Can I leave them over? I'm actually quite partial sometimes to pickled onions. Anyway, enough about me. The Gemara in Masechet Nida Yud Zayin Amud Aleph says, Amar Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, Chamisha Devarim Hein Ha'oseh Otan Mitchayev Benafsho V'Damo Berosho. There are 5 things that if a person does them, he made himself liable. He's really putting his life in his own hands, and his blood is on his own head. What are those? Ha'ochel shum kaluf, someone who eats peeled garlic. Ubatzel kaluf, or peeled onion. Ubeitza klufa, or a peeled egg. V'hashotem mashkin mezugin she'ava alehen halayla, or one who drinks diluted drinks. All of these things, don't worry about them. I do eat peeled garlic and peeled onions and eggs and diluted water. These are all things where they were left out overnight. Another case, v'halan b'veit hakvarot, someone who sleeps in a cemetery. V'hanotel tzipornav v'zorkan neshot harabim, or someone who cuts his nails and throws them into the main street. V'hamekiz dam u'mishamesh mimitato, and someone who has his blood taken from him, like he has his blood drawn, and immediately has marital relations. From the continuation of the Gemara, it seems that this warning, even if they were covered, but does not apply if one left the peel or the roots on. So forget the last 3 cases, which are interesting in of themselves, of the sleeping in a cemetery and throwing the nails into the main street, and the person who has his blood drawn and he has marital relations right after. But from the Gemara's perspective, the main piece that we're focusing on here is that the peeled garlic and the peeled onions, the peeled egg, it's all referring to when they are left overnight. But it also doesn't apply if one left the peel or the root on them. And he continues, and these peeled foods are dangerous even if they're placed in a basket and they are tied and sealed in that basket throughout the night. Why? Our favorite friend is back, Ruach Ra'ah Shiralian, because the evil spirit rests upon them. And we say that eating them is dangerous only if one did not leave on them their roots or their shells. But if one left on them their roots or their shells, we have no problem with it. Now, again, I want to go back just a little bit, which is if we asked our grandparents on any of these things, guaranteed they wouldn't do any of these things. Customs. Our customs, this is not just Sephardic, this is not just Ashkenazic, this is non-Jews as well. I think everyone used to be very, very careful with these types of things. But somehow, Our concern for Ruach Ra'ah has gone out of the window. Rashi explains that in order to avoid the danger, even leaving some of the hairs on the top of the onion is enough. Thus, leaving on the peel or some hairs will not render the food forbidden. If you leave a little bit on, that'll be enough. Shulchan Aruch does not put any of this into halacha, but later achronim, such as the Shulchan Aruch Harav, that's the first Chabad Rebbe wrote his Shulchan Aruch. He writes, one should not eat peeled garlic or peeled onion or peeled egg that has been left overnight because of the Ruach Ra'ah, even if they're tied up with a piece of clothing and sealed. But if one left the root, i.e. the hair on the head of the garlic or onion, or a small amount of the peel, then they are permitted. Hacham Ovadia notes in his Halichot Olam that nachon linzaher, one should be careful. Shelo laniach shum kluf ubatzel kaluf ubetzah kalufa. One should be careful not to place peeled garlic or onion or peeled egg that should be left overnight. Zulat im erev et hashum v'batzel klufim im achlim acherim. But if you mix them with other foods, kagon salat, for example, in a salad, or ma'aseh kedera, or in a cooked dish, v'tigun sha'al yedei tarovet, and frying them with a mixture, then there's no concern. The Yalkut Yosef adds, and we're not concerned about canned onions or canned garlic, or in a jar. You can often get minced garlic or minced, all these types of things, even if they were left overnight. Since they are not edible after they dry them out, but it seems that pickled onions in water, one should only be lenient b'diavad, as explained there, since they are edible, but it requires further analysis. If that's the case, I'm going to be in trouble if I buy a jar of pickled onions, which I quite like sometimes. That's going to be a problem. Any of these types of foods. What if the eggs are peeled on Thursday night and they're left in the refrigerator until Friday? Although generally we don't do that. Is that a problem? The Pinei Halacha rules that there's no reason to be strict. Okay? Rav Melamed says we're not concerned with these types of things. He says some of the custom not to eat peeled garlic, onion, or egg that were left out overnight, even if they were closed inside a utensil or wrapped in a bag. So even if you were to cover it, it's still a problem because of Ruach Ra'ah. But many are not careful about this, and they don't have the custom to be concerned about it. Why? Because it's not codified, not in Harambam and not in the Shulchan Aruch. And even in the days of the rabbis of the Tanaim, the Ruach Ra'ah had the power to harm over them. We know that Ruach Ra'ah doesn't harm us. And this is the halacha, that it is not appropriate to practice prohibitions that have no basis in halacha and based upon reasons of danger that is not visible in our days. But one who has the family has the custom to be strict and mistakenly let them overnight, he is permitted to avoid eating them without concern for the prohibition of Baal Tashchit. Okay, so I just want to explain here. He's saying, strictly speaking, we don't need to worry about it. Why? Ruach Ra'ah doesn't apply today. Number two, it's not codified in Harambam or in Shulchan Aruch. But if you have a family minhag, to be careful about this. It could be your personal family minhag. It could be you are a Kabbalist. It could be you are Hasidic. It could be you are a Sephardic home which has lots of concern about these types of things. Lots of cases, examples. If your family does that, then you can be careful, should be careful, and therefore if something got left out, you could throw it out and it wouldn't be a concern of wasting that food of what's being considered Baal Tashchit, of destroying something which has a use. And there we have it, friends. That's the end of that unit. We have now concluded the conversations about foods which we need to be careful of because of danger. Are there any questions? All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to stop my recording.